I think I should mention the oiig.org, which I haven't put anything up yet, but it's there.
So this is our third and final talk for this ApacheCon. Unless we do, but I just noticed there are lightning talks, and that's an opportunity not to be missed except by me. This is, of course, focusing now on the granular and more interesting issues that have been raised in the prior two talks, namely what Peter's meaning when he is referring to the converter, and also architecture and its operation with, right now, the JavaScript element. But as we mentioned before, and as others have raised, it doesn't have to be exactly this code. It's just this is what has worked so far. This is what we're starting with. So we have an object that is enabling us to develop into an incubator project in Apache and then go from there. So Peter Kelly has already done the work, of course, out of UX Productivity, which he founded about 3 years ago, was it? And then he started selling quite successfully an iOS app called UX Write. And if you haven't actually looked at UX Write, I recommend that you just download it. You can get a free version off the Apple Store or iTunes App Store, and see what it's doing, see what it's like, see how it's different in its approach to actually doing things. What happened then is that Apple changed how it was so-called selling iWorks, giving it away for free, and then Microsoft followed suit, and so there was no market anymore. And the result was a lot of people started using on iOS either Microsoft or Apple products and not buying Peter's product. This we found to be disturbing for obvious reasons, and also we learned that the iOS store actually echoes or has this echo a great deal because a lot of people have been finding it really hard to make money off of or through the iOS store. It used to be relatively easy, now it's actually not.
Not to mention all the rip-off apps. There was one for a long time that was called Easy to Use Microsoft Word, and it was a tutorial on how to use the desktop version of Microsoft Word. They were selling it for $5. People were downloading it thinking it was the actual Word for the iPad. And yeah, there's a lot of dodgy...
It gets even worse because what happens with the iOS stores and what happens now with a lot of app stores, and this is kind of disturbing, is you have a lot of, as Peter's saying, you have companies that are creating bad copies or applications manquées of something that everyone knows is good and popular, and people are buying it because they don't really have a way of determining what's good and what's bad. And they're being put into this relentless mode of being a consumer because all these things are cheap enough so that it doesn't really hurt if you lose some money. It's $5 US, something like that, say €2. It's not that much money, so you can just do it.
The minority market works differently. Nobody ever paid for anything.
Then that's good, yes. Great for them. But the point is that it's really hard for a lot of consumers, especially in the iOS store environment, to discern quality, and it's even harder for them to understand, because of this arrangement, what opportunities, what freedoms they have, say, with open source. In fact, it becomes harder and harder the more and more crap is out there for them to understand that open source could actually be a way to get around that. Android would be a fine example, but many of those people are not on iOS.
No, but Android's more evil.
But let's finish this.
Anyway, so let me go through the technical aspects of how this works, and then we'll get back into the discussion.
Questions, please hold your questions until...
Yeah, for this instance, because there's a lot of stuff to get through. So I'm being mindful of time, and then Svanti's got his very interesting talk, which I think is something to do with change tracking, something like that, afterwards. Anyway, okay, so things change a lot. And if you think about back in the early 1980s, when the personal computers were just becoming big, and there were like hundreds of word processors out there, but none of them, the interoperability, nobody thought of that. It's just like, well, okay, all right. So every statement I make, there's always going to be an exception for. Okay, so for the most part, people did not worry about interoperability.
That's
Okay.
what they did. That's why they became a business standard.
Edward?
Sure. Okay. We'll come back to that. Okay. We'll come back to that. Okay. Anyway, there were a lot of word processors built which used their own custom binary file format. Okay, and it wasn't the matter that you could necessarily just take something from WordPerfect and open it in WordStar or vice versa. And when people upgraded to newer word processors, there was like Apple Write and there was WordStar, WordPerfect, and Microsoft Word. There was always this kind of uncomfortable transition phase where you've got files in the old format and somebody's still on WordStar and you've moved on and so forth. And then that sort of continued to a large extent into the 1990s. We had the famous .doc file format, which a disturbing number of people still seem to like using. It's just really not nice to deal with. If there's anybody here from the POI project or who's done work with that, it's an incredibly challenging thing to deal with. But in the 2000s, there was the push by a number of people and a number of organisations to say, let's have an open standard that we can use so that every Office suite can implement that standard and then we can all talk to each other very easily. And as you know the story, ODF was proposed and everybody got on board and Microsoft saw that and they saw that's great, we're gonna forget about our own file format, everything's going to be ODF, and now we're all using ODF and there's no interoperability problems. Actually, that's not quite what happened, as I think you're aware. So there was a big battle. We've got OXML and we've got ODF. And we've got Markdown and we've got LaTeX and we've got people still using .doc. And I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where there's one universal file format that everybody uses. So if you're writing a word processor in the 2010s, what are you doing, right? How do you deal with this proliferation of file formats? So we just have to live with this, okay? The ODF effort had some success in the sense that it produced a working standard and there's working implementations of it out there. That's good. More importantly, it forced Microsoft's hand to do an open XML standard, right? And there's debates about, the merits of the different formats, but at least it did get Microsoft adopting a file format, which it's actually not that bad when you look at it. There are some flaws, but it's not as bad as it's made out to be on some of the ODF blogs that.
It's also gotten better.
Yeah,
it's about 6,000 pages of crap.
It's not perfect, but it's a huge improvement over the older binary format. So it's not everything that we wanted, but it's a very positive step forward. Anyway, so we've got all these different file formats. So
If I can just intervene in one thing.
Yeah.
Yes. One reason why Microsoft did not adopt ODF and why everyone did not universally adopt it is because they felt that the file format was limiting the way it was sketched out. And that was part of the intention. It was essentially tabula rasa. And what this does, though, is that they're trying to unify or tightly unify the linkage between the application and the format. And ODF tried to clarify the separation between those two. And so there's always going to be a population of people, of users, who want some features that their favorite program generates or has, but another one doesn't. And the danger is always linking the format, the expression, the data with the application itself. And so that brings into play the importance of having kind of like a universal converter, something that can work with various kinds of environments and formats.
Okay, so it's tempting, to fall into this trap, which the industry does all the time. We'll create another file format that takes into account everybody's use cases, and I mean that's kind of what ODF was, right? but we just have to live with the fact that we had these different formats. So we have to pick, like if you're writing an app, you have to have a data model that you're using, right, of some form, right, which can kind of cater for the different capabilities of different file formats. And rather than come up with a new one, we thought, well, let's pick an existing one. Now, it doesn't really, in terms of this kind of the fact that you have to have a format, it doesn't really matter which one you use as the native file format. Okay, you could pick ODF and you could say that's the native format, everything else gets converted to ODF back again. Or you could pick OXML as Microsoft Office does, right? Everything gets imported. So we chose HTML, and the reason for choosing HTML, which I discussed in the talk yesterday, is because of the fact that there's implementations out there that already know how to parse HTML. They already know how to render HTML, so we can make use of all of that work that's already been done in WebKit and other browser engines. They've already done the heavy lifting for us in terms of layout. Now, there are some limitations to that. There are a few interoperability problems. So I'm not pretending this is a perfect solution, but the entire web is built on this. So I figure if it's good enough for the entire web, it's good enough for me. I'm happy to run with that.
And that point is actually to be emphasized, is that we're not envisioning that everyone is going to be only using the narrow constraints tablet offers or mobile device offers. We don't believe that. I would not want to do a spreadsheet on a mini iPad, for example, unless I went to prison. I just don't envision this. What I do envision, though, is the possibility of having a flexibility involved. And that's one reason why this is actually kind of important, because we don't want this situation where people don't have that possibility of choice and flexibility.
So despite its limitations and despite some interoperability problems, every website in the world uses HTML and CSS. So that's what we're using as well. And lots of people understand it, and it's very widely used. So I decided, okay, so I'm going to build this word processor, UX right. I'm going to take WebKit, which is already built into iOS. You can very easily embed it in your app, and I'll just feed a HTML, and that'll display it. And then I just have to write the editing code. I'm not going to be talking about the editor today, but rather the conversion logic. Now, just on a bit more on HTML, these are some of the limitations that it does have, and it's important to be aware of that there are many benefits of it. There are some downsides to it as well, and the main downsides are that it's not well suited to paginated documents where you need a precise matching of the layout, and that is important for some people. And if you need precise WYSIWYG page-by-page layout, HTML is not the format for you. Okay, this is not all things to all people. So those limitations are there. However, the upside is that HTML is very good at responsive design. If you want to cater for everything from a 30-inch monitor right down to a 4.3-inch iPhone, HTML will do that, and it will adapt the content so that it's easy to read, regardless of the screen size. And so there's upsides and downsides to that.
We're also envisioning that people can add elements that can provide or that can fill the gaps.
And HTML is still evolving, right? So maybe in 10 years' time, it will be a fantastic format for print, right? So there's, people, over the years, there's been many criticisms, HTML doesn't do this and doesn't do that. And then somebody comes along and they add the feature to the spec and they implement it in WebKit and in Firefox and in Chrome and in Internet Explorer. So there is that evolution. I have a lot of faith in that evolutionary process, that the web is going to continue to evolve and become more and more capable. And that's really where everything's going, right? As far as I'm concerned, that's where we should be looking towards for the future, is based on web technologies.
And one point, this is not saying the browser, of course, it's saying the web. So you can have things that are using technology the web uses without specifying it only through the browser. because I'm envisioning people saying, oh, mobiles don't use browsers really because it's such a pain. We use specific apps. Web versus browser.
So when I'm talking about web technologies, I'm also referring to a situation where you have a native app and you've got a web view embedded inside that app. And that's what UX Write does. It has a native iOS user interface using Cocoa Touch, which is the APIs that iOS provides. And it embeds a web view as part of the user interface. So it doesn't have to be actually in a web browser. So we need a way to be able to get documents from other file formats into HTML so that we can edit them and then save them back. Now, this introduces a bit of a challenge. Traditionally, this is done using an import and export process, right? You have a word processor and you say, I want to open this file. It's not in the native format. I have to import it, right? So it goes through this import process and it translates as much as it can, but maybe there's some features that aren't supported, right? So HTML doesn't have support for footnotes, right? You can fake it by having, a paragraph that says one dot this, or you can have like a list of footnotes, but there's no HTML footnote element, right? So that's something that can't get translated across. Now, in my implementation, I do actually have it does translate it into a span with class equals footnote. So that's kind of still faking it. But there's no sort of native support for footnotes in HTML, right? And this is actually a diagram from back when I didn't have support for footnotes. So for the purposes of this, we lose footnotes and we lose any information in the footer about page numbers when we translate. So what we get is just the stuff that is supported where we've got some headings and some text. So you've lost that information, then you do some editing, you make some changes to this and say, okay, now I want to save this back to a docx file, and then you do an export, but because you're overwriting the original file, that stuff that was there before is gone because it was already lost back here, right? So import export is problematic in that sense. And I've seen many comments from some of the other word processors for the iPad, people complaining, oh, it messes up my documents, right? I just wanted to change one typo in the document on my iPad, and suddenly all the formatting's messed up, right? So I saw those criticisms and I thought, well, I want to avoid that, right? I want to try and sort of be able to edit a document without kind of screwing everything up with it. And I looked around and I found out about this technique called bidirectional transformation. And this is something that's, there's a ton of academic literature in there. People have produced programming languages based on the idea. And there's been lots and lots of work done on it. Basically, the idea is that instead of just kind of converting it and then throwing away the original and then creating a new file when you convert back, you instead have this update process. So when you save the file, so if you're using UX Write and you open a docx file, it converts it using the doc formats library, which is part of this Corinthia project. And so you edit it in UX Write, and then when you save it, it takes into account what was in the original file, and it looks at the changes that you've made, and then it updates the original file based on the changes you've made, right? So that means that it can preserve anything that was in the original file that it was not able to translate into HTML, that stays there. And I'll give it a demonstration of that. I'll actually give the demonstration of that now, just to illustrate how this works in practice. So what I'm going to do, this code is up on GitHub already, so I'm going to check that out. Clone.
That's quick.
Yes.
So I'm glad we have a
That's
fast.
good.
Yeah, I'm glad we have a fast internet connection here.
Because the infrastructure has this talk.
We've got to thank the infra guys. Okay, So I've checked that out. So I'm going to build this. So the way that you build the code, we're using CMake. So I'm going to create a separate directory to build in. I type cmake-g Unix makefiles. Okay, so this will create a makefile, and then I can just type make to compile that.
While they compile speaker, for people who want to clone and download, we anticipate a number of changes during the next month.
That's correct, yes. And this is going up on YouTube, by the way, so you can come back and watch it if you want to follow along with this at home. So this gives us so at the moment this is kind of a library. It doesn't really have graphical user interface on top of it. There's a program called dfutil, and this does various things, but the main thing it does is it converts between different files. So I've got my dfutil program, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Word document. So I'm going to go into Microsoft Word. And I'll type in some text there. I'll add a table. I'll put in an image. Okay, so we've got a simple document there. Now, so this stuff will translate to HTML just fine, okay? Because text, tables, images, they're supported in HTML. What I'm going to also do is I'm going to put in a embedded spreadsheet. And I've got that in another file here. So this is an embedded object. And if I double click on that in Word, it brings it up in Excel for the embedded editor. Now this is not supported in HTML, so this is something that if we were doing an import to HTML and an export back, we would lose this spreadsheet. Right? Another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to underline some text, and to demonstrate how we can preserve formatting that's not supported in HTML, I'm going to change the underline style of this, and I'm going to make it a dashed underline. So in HTML and CSS, the only type of underline you can have is single straight underline. There's no dashed or wavy lines or anything like that. And so I'm going to demonstrate how this can be preserved even after we've changed the HTML file. Okay, so we've got two things there that are not going to translate to HTML. So I'll save that document. Okay. Now, I will go into that directory, and I'm going to convert that file into HTML. Just type dfutil demo.docx demo.html. And dfutil, that name may change, as Jan mentioned. We're still sort of working out how some of the aspects of the structure of the code. But anyway, so we've now got a HTML file, demo.html. I can open that in Safari, and we can see that we've got that translation come across. We can see we've got the single underline because that's all that's supported. Where we've got the Excel spreadsheet, it just says unsupported object, right? There's no way to express that in HTML. And then the table and the image have translated just fine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a change to the HTML file. And then after that I'm going to convert it back to Word. So if I open the file, sorry, I want to open that in Editor. Okay, So I've got my HTML code here. There's the table. There's the unsupported object, and the text. This is the bit where there's the underline. It just says text decoration underline. Equivalently, you can have the U element in HTML. It's the same thing. So I'm going to change the word demo to example. Okay? Simple change to the text. Now, that's the only thing I've changed in the document. I haven't changed the underline. I haven't touched the spreadsheet or anything else. I haven't changed the table. Actually, I will change the table. I'll just change that to 1 and 2. Okay, so there's only 3 changes that I've made. And those are the only changes that we should see when we convert back. Right? We want to make sure that those other elements are preserved. So to convert that back, just make sure I close that in Word. So I take that and then I say dfutil demo.html demo.docx. Okay, so what that has now done is that's updated the docx file with the changes that I've made. And if I open that in Word, we will see that, well, that's interesting. It's just because it's wrapped onto the next line. If we were to make that, if we were to use a smaller font, then that would all fit on the one line. So that's why it was displaying like that. So we've still got this dashed underline here. You can see. So that's been kept. It's changed the text. The spreadsheet is still there. I can go into Excel. I can I can make changes there. Update that. The table is there. You can see I've just modified the 2 cells there, and then we've got our image, and that's spilled onto the next page because of the that wrapping around on the line. But the image is still there. If I were to change that back to demo, then we've got the image on the same page, just because I had some extra text. So what you can see here is this is preserved unsupported features in the original file format, and that's a really key thing about the library, is that it doesn't screw up your documents when you can edit it, and that's very important for people to be able to have trust in the library for using it.
That's very impressive.
Did you have a question?
I was just thinking, could there be, if I were to delete that paragraph where the unsupported object would it then delete the unsupported object? Or?
Yes. So I'll talk about how this mapping is done. So actually, a couple more slides I'll go through to explain the operations, and then I'll come back and talk about that. Okay, so bidirectional transformation. There's essentially two pieces of data that you're working with in BDT. The first is the source, and that's the file in its original format. So in this context, the original format is docx, and then you have the view, which in this context is HTML. So that it's a bit like the view update problem in a database, right? You have the table, and then you can have a view. So HTML is the view, and the view contains only a subset of the information that is in the source. So the get operation is what I did first. The first command I ran, convert the docx to HTML. That's a get operation. It takes the source as input, it gives you the view. Now, after I'd edited it, I ran the command a second time, but with the files switched around. The update operation, it takes the original document and it takes a modified version of the view. And what it does is it gives you an updated source file, which has the changes that you've made applied in the original document. And there's a third operation, which is where if you're starting a new document and you've got that in HTML format and you want to get it into docx, that's where you have a view and you do a create operation, and that gives you something in the source. Yes?
This differential approach, can this, do you apply this also to the other different formats? OXML,
Currently there's the only format that this is supported for in the library is docx. However, what we want to do, and what we're hoping that some people will be willing to help us with, is adding support for other file formats. So this technique, and the way that the code's written, there's a lot of support code there that you can use to do this. And the same technique we intend to apply to support ODF as well, Markdown, various other formats, the same basic approach. And we only do word processing documents at present, but if there are people who are interested in seeing support for spreadsheets, presentations, drawings, and so forth, the same ideas can be applied in those contexts.
So the concept here, in fact, is I've now started to replace it, is not actually for document creation, but for short little edits, annotation. Just basically change a word and that's it.
Yep.
If you are creating documents, your paradigm says use Word or use.
It could
Open
very
Office.
well be
Use
that.
it
It's
as
basically
Use it as top.
our principle is you could do that exactly, but our principle is good enough, and go from there and have something actually people can use.
It will scale from everything from just fixing one typo
Yeah.
to working with a whole document.
Are you coming back to the software structure?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Just a few sort of identity laws here that if you have a source and if you convert a source to a view and then you immediately do a put operation, then which is put is update. I think I use those terms interchangeably. So if you convert it to a view and then you update the source, you get back the original source. Right? That's something that all implementations of the operation should be true for. If you update a source and then you do a get on it, you should get back the same view. And similarly, if you create a source from a view and then you do a get immediately after that, you can get through the same view. There may be some. The results should be equivalent. They may not be exactly byte for byte the same, depending on implementation details. There's just some references. This is not the last slide, but I'm just putting that up there. These are two really good resources to look at if you want to find out more about BDT. I'm just going to talk about how we do this mapping between the HTML and the docx. So in this HTML code, there's the ID attributes of every element have a number associated with them, and so word 15, word 16, word 52, whatever. When it parses the OXML file, when it parses the document.xml in its XML tree in memory, it assigns a unique ID to every node. And so when you convert a particular element to its HTML equivalent, we set the ID attribute to that number, right? And the way that that's used is when you do an update, it will parse the document.xml again, and that will get the same numbers. And then it says, oh, okay, you've changed this word 7. Okay, what's that? Oh, okay, that's this element in document.xml. So that's what I need to update. So that's the way that we know that text that I changed corresponds to this element in the Word file. 2 caveats to that. I'll come to your question in a second. 2 caveats. One is that if you do an update to the same document twice, the numbers aren't going to match the second time. So what you have to do is you have to take the first one that the HTML was, you have to keep that around until you've finished with the HTML. The second caveat is that if you in the editor, if it deletes those IDs for whatever reason, now the editing code in Corinthia doesn't do that, but if it deletes those IDs, then it'll think that you've deleted everything in the document and replaced it with entirely new. Now, I do have some ideas about how we can get around this. Instead of using IDs, we can synthesize those when we parse the document again, and then we can run a diff algorithm on the tree to work out what's changed. So I think we may actually be able to get rid of those IDs altogether. You had a question?
One of the questions, which is probably bringing up to what Slum is
Yeah,
going to
exactly,
talk about
yeah.
a little bit, is since you're just doing the diff and the changes and the revisions, and in docx you do actually have, for the next various versions, are you also mapping to that? Because then, even if you've done various things, you have the reference to which version of the docx actually you worked on, so you can then apply the translations to get a new revision and going on to that.
Yes.
Is this what you do, or what you plan to do?
This is what I'm hoping we'll be able to achieve. I think it will work, but
But it's
see,
not
yeah.
something that's available for all formats. So in the kernel of Corinthia, we need to have the support for a more generic method.
Yeah, no, it's just the whole point is
Yeah.
one of the heavily used features of Word is that you can go back to the earlier version of the document.
Yes, and
That's
HTML
exactly-
actually has an insert element and a delete element, and that gets translated. If you've got track changes in your Word document, it will translate those. But that's Fanti's realm, and I will let him
But he's
talk
doing
about
it.
that. I know. There's a number of different ways to do it, but we'll maybe I'll ask some questions of you in your talks, Fanti. Okay, so we're running out of time, so I'm just going to quickly just talk about the architecture of the library. So the actual library that does conversion is called doc formats, but the project that it's a component of is Corinthia. And this is what it's useful for. Now, I'm just going to talk very briefly about the architecture. I know this looks a bit scary, there's a lot of stuff there. Essentially, we have a set of filters. Not all of these exist yet, and actually OXML is the only one that exists, and HTML. HTML is special because of the fact that that's the internal representation, but we're also in the process of having a way to sort of strip out all the ID stuff and unsupported objects and all that. So you have a set of filters that implement the logic for various file formats, and they all rely on the core module. So that provides basically a set of utility functions for doing stuff like parsing XML, searching through, mapping IDs to elements. There's helper functions to do with, it's all written in C for portability. So there's things in there to do with string manipulation, hash tables, stuff like that. And there's also the algorithms for doing bidirectional transformation provided as part of core. And then we have a platform module, so that abstracts over the differences between the different native operating system APIs. And then we've got a small number of third-party libraries that we rely on. And I should actually put SDL in there because we're using SDL image there to get, just for getting image dimensions. That's only a very minor point. So everything here is internal to the library, and this part we haven't done yet, but we're going to define it, and this is something we hope to get input from people on. And actually all of this we want input on, right? But this is something that is sort of the next step, is to define a clean interface so that all of this can be hidden behind this API, and then the consumers, which are programs that use the library, can then just talk to this API and they don't have to know about all this stuff going on here. And then this editor component up there, that's the JavaScript component, which is also part of the Corinthia project, and that you can use that within a web browser or web view. That's actually totally independent of doc formats, right? You just convert to HTML, and the editor only knows about HTML. And there's test harnesses and the converting, which you've seen, and then there's other things that I'm sure will come along as people find other uses for the library. So that's the basic architecture.
How large is the actual converter?
How big?
Large. I mean, it's 550 kilobytes or something that you downloaded?
I don't know. It's really small relative to comparable programs.
So basically, you can add things to it. It's
But
minuscule.
I'm sure it will grow as more people get involved. Yes. Okay. I think we're pretty much out of time. Is there any quick questions? Okay. All right. Questions?
So this out of the box can be applied for all the different media and word formats that we have. I mean, we do have different versions, it's not just docx, right? If you look at older formats, they differ slightly, and there are certain aspects or certain objects in Word which did not exist in probably 2008 versus 2012 and so on.
So at the moment,
Out of the box, which versions?
out of the box,
I mean, if I just pull out the code and if I just try to use this, which are the versions which I can currently use?
okay, out of the box, it's docx only. Right, that's the only file format that's supported, and it's docx as given in the OXML spec. Right, so Microsoft have added other stuff in Word 2010 where they've got sort of extra elements that they've invented that I couldn't find in a spec anywhere. But that's Microsoft. So it's effectively Office 2010. Oh, sorry, Office 2007 is sort of the stuff that's supported there is what is in the spec. And so we don't support all of the spec. But we support most of the important stuff for word processing only. However, and this is one of the reasons for making it open source is that we're hoping we'll get interest from other people. We would love people to get involved with the project and write filters for other file formats as well. We particularly want ODF. Support for the older Microsoft .doc and similar binary formats would be great. RTF, Markdown. So depends what people are interested in seeing. Yeah.
What is the maximum usability in terms of? I mean, is RTF that much? Is that so much used?
Yes.
It's surprisingly it is, and I don't know why. But in the keynote on Monday, in the interview with Hugh Howey, somebody asked a question about his workflow that he uses and what tools he uses. And one of the parts of his workflow he mentioned was that at some point he has his document in RTF. Now,
publishers wanted RTF, that's why I think.
Right.
RTF is historically been used because Microsoft had non-published binary formats. Not that RTF was published. I mean, the publication of RTF came later, but it was easy enough to reverse engineer and easy enough to do various work with, and so companies adopted. The company I work for basically made a lot of money by supporting RTF.
So
and RTF is text-based as well. You can open it in a text editor.
It looks like text.
Yeah.
Which is what it was basically inspired it.
It's not a fantastic format, but it is still used, and I would love to see that supported in the library. So I think there's probably enough demand out there, and the whole point of this is that this is something that anybody can use if they've got an app that they want to deal with these different file formats. We want to make sure this library to be usable by anybody who faces this problem of having to deal with multiple file formats, and that's really the key thing about it being open source is that anybody can make use of this, and if they need a particular format that's not in the library, hopefully they can have some time to contribute to it and add that, and we all benefit from that.
And it's also one reason why this we think is powerful and important because it's small, it's really small. And so you can grasp what it's doing easily and quickly without feeling overwhelmed by the immensity of the task before them. And then ideally we hope they can contribute they'll feel empowered or able to contribute, because it's not so much like they are just going to be lost, or they can add features relatively easily because it's really small, easy to get, and has ways of improving.
I should mention the documentation at the moment is
In
minimal.
our heads.
But I will be doing a brain dump in the coming weeks,
Yeah.
getting it from up here into a format that other people can read.
The problem is we have jobs, so I keep telling you.
Everybody's busy.
So this is something that would hopefully one day get us out of having jobs, but we need to have documentation, because even though the architecture is pretty clear, that it's a small program, misinterpretations always happen. This is the nature of open source. It can sometimes be good, sometimes bad, but we want people to be able to come to this fresh and start working on it, and for that they'll probably need documentation.
Anything else?
So if someone's going to start contributing for other, I'm going to stick to the different formats of 2012 versus 2010 versus 2008. So what's the best place to start?
Probably the best place to start is to look at the existing code and see how that works. Jan?
The best place to start is to look at the incubator list. In a couple of weeks, we would fill in the proposal there, sign up as initial committer. That's the right way to start.
And in a few weeks, there will be some documentation that explains how you can get involved, because that's really my next priority. That's the most important thing I need to do next. Is write that, how to get started writing a new filter or modifying an existing filter. So that will be coming very soon.
And again, this isn't just for mobiles, it's also for desktop, it's any environment.
And web.
And web, basically. I mean, you want, for example, while you were talking, I was thinking, well, Wikimedia would love to have something like this, because they use ODF now whenever they want, but their HTML requirements far exceed the spec, so they would love something like this.
Okay, thank you.